Okay, if you remember a few weeks back, we did these color charts in class where I had you with just three primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, plus white. I had you mix as many possible colors in every band of the spectrum as we could. We started with violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. And I just had you try to move the color as dynamically as you could across the multiple dimensions. If you remember, the color had different dimensions. It could be dark, we could see very dark values, okay? So it could go dark and light. We could see very light values. You know, we have a lighter values, darker values. So the lighter, darker is one dimension of color. Another dimension of color was that it could be saturated or desaturated. Like, see, if we look at these greens, they're quite desaturated, kind of olive color, or maybe they could be almost a steel gray color. Or they could be very saturated and have more color present in them, be closer to what we would imagine a really brilliant green might be on the spectrum, like a saturated blue. Or maybe a gray blue if we were to find one on here. There's kind of a gray blue over here. It's a lighter one. And then they also had one other dimension that we can point out, and that is that it can change its hue slightly. It has a tendency to be able to lean, like, so for example, if we're taking green, it can lean towards yellow, like the yellow end of the spectrum on this side, or it could lean itself towards the blue end of the spectrum, for example here, darker light or middle value on this side. So it can lean into the blues, it can lean into the yellows. And like I just mentioned, it can be desaturated with complements. Using, say, a reddish violet, because remember, red is the complement of green. If we used a red violet, we would get a cooler gray-green mixture. And if we used, say, a orange or red, we would get a much warmer, more olive green mixture, like maybe these in here, neutralizing, adding the complement or the third primary. This is important because we want to take this dynamic into the actual painting process. Most people start by simply thinking about a general local color for an object and then making it darker or lighter. And they mainly explore that dimension of color. But we're going to be thinking a little bit more about the temperature and the saturation in this next project. And if you get a hold of this dynamic in your painting, if you're able to incorporate this, it's going to make huge improvements in your use of color. So it's extremely important, whether you're working in digital art or whether you're working in traditional painting or whatever. For these projects that you're going to be painting, and I have a separate demo video which you can watch after this showing you how I want you to approach this, but for these projects we're going to be using relatively simple forms, and we're not so concerned about careful drawing as we are color, okay? So I've set this up and under a warm light and a cool light, and I'd like you to do the same. So for example, I've got a warmer light coming from this side over here and a cool light coming from this side over here, okay? The best thing for you to do would be to simply set your still life up when you do work on your project right up next to a window. So on one side you're letting skylight in, skylight's very blue, maybe even bluer than this, and then just light it with a lamp from the other side and you'll get the color contrast and a little bit of a strong, you'll exaggerate it a bit, but it's helpful for this project. Just in showing you these, I just want you to make a couple observations. It may not be super clear in the video I'm making here, but as it would be if you're actually looking at it in person, but just to make some observations. So turn the light away just a bit. The cool light really changes, it changes the color of this object. So we're not just thinking about a darker version of the blue or a lighter version of the blue. We're actually looking at this as a different kind of blue. It's actually probably got a lot of yellow light bounced into it, a little bit of red light bounced into it, which is neutralizing it. And it has less of the blue in it. It's actually becoming something a bit different, kind of a warm gray, maybe slightly leaning into the green blue, but it's being neutralized by the warms. And so if I was mixing this color, I probably would be using like a lot of yellow, maybe a touch of red, and maybe some white, and a touch of a blue in there. So it would create something like that. On this side, we get a very saturated, the cool color of the light is complementing the cool color of the object, and we get this really bluish color. I probably wouldn't have very much warm yellow or red to neutralize in this side. If we looked at this object here, and this is true of any object, if you look here, this is a different kind of orange than this is. This is a little more, slightly more neutral, but it's cooler. It's operating in the moving towards the violet red side. I'd probably be adding crimson into this color, like the cooler red. and I would be moving away from the warmer, and I might not have as much yellow in that color. It's moving away from the yellow, whereas this one's getting a lot of a stronger orange, red, and yellow. In other words, I'm not just taking a base color and making it darker or lighter. I'm actually mixing a separate color out of a warm red and a warm yellow, and mixing another color out of a cooler violet red with maybe some white. And I would be mixing them in separate places on my palette, putting them down. Just to go a little bit further with this observation, I can show you on this apple, okay? If you notice, it affects all forms. Light is dynamic like this, and it exists around us all the time. If you can, it might be a little tricky, but you might feel a lot of yellow or even kind of slightly warm yellows up into this part. And if we looked over here, it would feel very blue, almost like a neon bluish color. It moves even further away to the blue-green side. And we would have a warmer yellowish side, a greener bluish side, and then as it reflects off this orange, you'd pick up some of that light reflected as well, and other surfaces around it. Even look at the table here. Look how warm that color is. It's almost kind of a, you can really feel the warmth there versus the shadow here on this side, which is very blue. So we get a warm shadow and a cool shadow in this case. And just to sort of exaggerate this or to point this out, I just folded a little piece of paper, and you can feel how when I move this towards the warm light, well, you can feel the cool warm difference, here, the cooler green versus the warmer color. It's literally changing color, okay, before your eyes. We don't use the same colors here to mix as we do here. So this is a tricky thing to get a hold of, and in our projects we're really going to be focusing on that aspect of observing color, particularly the dimensions of temperature, of hue shifts, and of saturation as well, where things get desaturated.